December 16, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. Along an 85-mile stretch of the Ardennes forest, the ground erupts. More than 1,600 German artillery pieces open fire simultaneously, their shells screaming through the pre-dawn darkness toward American positions that have grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, in what soldiers call the ghost front. The quiet sector where green divisions come to learn the ropes and exhausted veterans come to rest. Within hours, 250,000 German soldiers supported by hundreds of tanks pour through gaps torn in American lines. Entire regiments cease to exist. Communications collapse. Command posts evacuate in chaos. By nightfall, German spearheads have advanced up to 12 miles into Allied territory, and Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force faces the nightmare scenario military planners whispered about but never seriously prepared for. Germany's last great offensive in the West, a massive armored thrust aimed at splitting the Allied armies and capturing the vital port of Antwerp. The bulge in American lines grows deeper by the hour. At the critical road junction of Bastogne, Belgium, the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division dig in, surrounded, outnumbered, and running low on everything except courage. Bastogne controls 7 roads radiating through the Ardennes like spokes on a wheel. Without it, German armor cannot maintain the momentum necessary for their offensive to succeed. With it, the Wehrmacht can drive straight through to the Meuse River and beyond. The Germans need Bastogne. The Americans cannot afford to lose it. But help seems impossibly far away. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower convenes an emergency meeting of his senior commanders on December 19 at a cold, dreary barracks in Verdun, France. The atmosphere matches the weather, grim and biting. German forces have created a bulge 50 miles deep and 70 miles wide in Allied lines. American casualties already exceed 8,000 men. Nobody knows the full extent of the disaster because communications remain severed across large sectors. The offensive threatens to unravel 6 months of hard-won gains since D-Day. Eisenhower enters the room and immediately sets the tone. The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this table. The statement borders on absurdity given the circumstances, but it reflects the mindset required to salvage this catastrophe. He turns to his most aggressive, controversial, and perhaps most talented field commander, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., whose Third Army is currently 100 miles south of the breakthrough, heavily engaged in offensive operations driving toward the Saar region of Germany. When can you attack north to relieve Bastogne? Eisenhower asks. Patton's response comes without hesitation. December 22. 3 days. With 3 divisions. The room falls silent. Other commanders exchange glances that mix disbelief with irritation. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, never one to hide his disdain for Patton's bravado, scoffs audibly. General Omar Bradley, Patton's immediate superior and longtime friend, looks physically pained. Even Eisenhower, who knows Patton's capabilities better than most, appears skeptical. The promise is militarily absurd. What Patton proposes violates every principle of military logistics and movement that professional soldiers spend careers studying. His Third Army currently faces east, engaged in active combat operations across a 90-mile front. To attack north toward Bastogne requires disengaging from those operations, pivoting the entire army 90 degrees, moving more than 130,000 men with all their vehicles, artillery, ammunition, fuel, and supplies over icy roads through the middle of winter, coordinating movement through sectors controlled by other Allied units, and arriving ready to immediately launch offensive operations against a German force that outnumbers them and holds better defensive terrain. All in 72 hours. During peacetime maneuvers with unlimited preparation time, such a movement would be considered a major accomplishment if completed in a week. Don't be fatuous, George, Eisenhower says, his patience thinning. But Patton doesn't back down. He opens his map case and produces 3 separate attack plans, each already drawn up in detail, each contemplating different scenarios for German offensive action in the Ardennes. Plan A calls for an attack with 3 divisions. Plan B with 4. Plan C with 6. Each plan includes march routes, fuel calculations, artillery positioning, and coordination protocols with adjacent units. The other commanders lean forward, studying the documents. These aren't hasty sketches produced for effect. They represent weeks of detailed staff work. The implications slowly dawn on everyone in the room. While the German offensive caught Allied intelligence completely by surprise, it did not catch George Patton by surprise. He anticipated something. Not the specific timing or location, but the possibility of a major enemy counteroffensive. And he prepared. Still, the skepticism persists. The historical record of large-scale military movements offers no precedent for what Patton promises. When Napoleon's Grande Army maneuvered to intercept the Austrians at Ulm in 1805, the operation took 11 days and covered less distance. When Lee shifted his Army of Northern Virginia from the Rappahannock to Gettysburg in 1863, the movement consumed nearly 2 weeks. More recently, during the First World War, moving divisions between sectors required extensive rail transport and week-long timelines. Patton proposes something exponentially more complex, executed in a fraction of the time, in worse weather, with a modern mechanized army that requires thousands of tons of supplies daily. The mathematics seem impossible. Third Army's 133,000 men are spread across positions from Luxembourg to the Moselle River. Moving them north to attack Bastogne requires traveling between 50 and 100 miles depending on starting position, but these aren't highway drives. The roads through the Ardennes are narrow, winding mountain routes, many unpaved. Winter has turned them into ribbons of ice and frozen mud. A single disabled vehicle can block an entire column for hours. The army must move in coordination, with infantry, armor, artillery, engineers, medical units, supply trains, and communications equipment all arriving in proper sequence to function as a cohesive fighting force. One traffic jam, one broken bridge, one supply convoy taking a wrong turn, and the entire operation collapses into chaos. Fuel alone presents a staggering challenge. Third Army's tanks, trucks, and vehicles consume roughly 350,000 gallons of gasoline per day during active operations. The 100-mile movement to Bastogne, followed by immediate combat operations, will require stockpiling fuel at forward positions that don't yet exist. Ammunition must be pre-positioned along routes Patton's staff has only just begun planning in detail. Medical facilities must be established to handle casualties. Communications networks must be extended across new sectors. All while maintaining complete operational security so German intelligence doesn't detect the massive redeployment and adjust their own plans accordingly. What Patton promises is more than just moving an army. He promises moving an army while maintaining its combat effectiveness, its morale, and its coordination sufficiently to launch immediate offensive operations against an enemy that has just achieved strategic surprise and holds momentum. The promise borders on fantasy. But Eisenhower knows something the other commanders seem to forget in this moment. Patton has been preparing for exactly this scenario, not because he possessed supernatural foresight, but because he fundamentally understands that war is fluid, that initiative belongs to the side that can react fastest, and that the best preparation is planning for contingencies others dismiss as unlikely. While other commands focused exclusively on their current operations, Patton's staff officers spent November running theoretical exercises. What if the Germans counterattack here? What if they break through there? What if we need to pivot north, south, east? For each scenario, they developed skeleton plans, identified key terrain, calculated movement rates, and pre-positioned supply dumps in locations that seemed unnecessary at the time but would prove invaluable now. Major General Hobart Gay, Patton's chief of staff, along with Colonel Halley Maddox and other senior staff officers, worked through these contingencies with the obsessive detail of men who know that battles are won or lost in the planning phases long before the first shot is fired. They identified every bridge between the Third Army's current positions and potential northern objectives. They calculated load-bearing capacities. They plotted alternate routes. They established relationships with fuel depot commanders and ensured stockpiles existed where official distribution plans said they shouldn't. When Patton stood before Eisenhower on December 19 making his impossible promise, he wasn't guessing. He was executing a plan that already existed in substantial detail, requiring only final adjustments for the specific circumstances. The meeting at Verdun concludes with Eisenhower's authorization. Patton will attack north on December 22. The other commanders depart shaking their heads, expecting failure, preparing excuses for when the Third Army arrives late, disorganized, and combat ineffective. Patton returns to his headquarters in Nancy, France, arriving near midnight. His staff is already awake, maps spread across every available surface, telephones ringing constantly. The headquarters resembles controlled chaos, but it's the chaos of purposeful action, not confusion. Patton's operations order, issued at 0200 hours on December 20, runs to 46 pages of single-space typescript. It directs the movement of 3 divisions, the 4th Armored, the 26th Infantry, and the 80th Infantry, totaling more than 133,000 men, along with supporting artillery, engineering, medical, and supply units. Each division receives specific march routes designed to prevent columns from interfering with each other. The 4th Armored Division, Patton's spearhead, will travel the most direct route toward Bastogne, approximately 75 miles through Luxembourg. The 26th Infantry Division will parallel them to the west. The 80th Infantry Division will advance on the eastern flank, protecting the Army's exposed right side. The movement begins before dawn on December 20, in darkness, in temperatures hovering near 0 Fahrenheit, over roads covered with ice. Soldiers who went to sleep expecting to attack east toward Germany wake to orders directing them north toward Belgium. Tank crews fire up engines that protest the cold. Supply sergeants frantically redistribute ammunition, pulling stocks from southern positions and trucking them north to positions that exist only as coordinates on maps. Engineers race ahead of the main columns, identifying bridges that might collapse under the weight of Sherman tanks, and placing emergency supports, marking detour routes. The first crisis hits within hours. The 4th Armored Division's lead elements encounter a traffic jam at a critical crossroads where their route intersects with supply convoys supporting other units. Vehicles back up for miles. Radio communications, already strained by the rapid redeployment, break down entirely in this sector. A major's decision saves hours. He commandeers military police, establishes a manual traffic control system using hand signals and colored flags, and personally directs vehicles through the intersection for 18 consecutive hours until the backup clears. His name is lost to history, but his initiative keeps Patton's timeline intact. Communications proved the most persistent challenge. Third Army uses radio frequencies coordinated with adjacent units based on their previous positions. As they move north, they enter sectors controlled by other commands with different frequency assignments. Radio operators find their transmissions blocked by friendly units using the same channels. The solution comes from improvisational brilliance at the battalion level. Signal officers establish relay stations using half-tracks positioned at intervals along the march routes, manually passing messages up and down the columns like a mechanized version of ancient signal fires. It's crude, it's slow, but it works well enough to maintain coordination. Fuel consumption exceeds even the generous estimates. Tanks traveling over icy roads burn gasoline at prodigious rates. Trucks slip and spin on inclines, engines roaring as drivers fight for traction. Quartermaster units work through the night establishing forward fuel dumps, sometimes simply parking tanker trucks along roadsides and guarding them until combat units arrive to refuel. Some units run completely dry and must wait hours for supply trucks to reach them. But Patton's staff anticipated this, building redundancy into the fuel distribution plan, prepositioning extra tankers at calculated intervals. The movement slows but doesn't stop. By December 21, the 4th Armored Division's lead elements cross into Belgium, still 30 miles south of Bastogne. Weather deteriorates. Freezing rain coats everything in ice. Visibility drops to near zero in some sectors. German reconnaissance aircraft spot the movement and report massive Allied forces moving north, but Wehrmacht commanders, committed to their offensive, cannot spare significant forces to oppose Patton's approach. They're racing to capture Bastogne themselves, surrounding it on December 21, demanding surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding the surrounded American forces in Bastogne, receives the German surrender ultimatum on December 22 at 1130 hours. His response, a single word, nuts, becomes legendary, but the bravado masks a desperate reality. The 101st Airborne and attached units hold Bastogne with approximately 18,000 men against German forces exceeding 45,000. Ammunition runs critically low. Medical supplies are nearly exhausted. Food is rationed to 1 meal per day. Casualties overflow the limited medical facilities. The defenders can hold for perhaps another 3 days. Maybe 4 if lucky. After that, mathematics takes over. They'll run out of bullets before the Germans run out of soldiers. Patton's forces attack north on schedule, December 22, not in 3 days as promised, but in 2.5. The 4th Armored Division hits German positions south of Bastogne at 0600 hours. What follows is not the sweeping breakthrough Hollywood depicts, but brutal, grinding combat through frozen forests and fortified villages. The Germans, recognizing the threat, divert forces to block Patton's advance. Every mile costs American lives. Tank destroyers firing from concealed positions knock out Shermans. Infantry dug into frozen foxholes fight with the desperation of men who know they're losing the war but can still kill Americans. The advance slows to a crawl, sometimes measuring progress in hundreds of yards per day rather than miles. But the advance doesn't stop. Patton drives forward relentlessly, rotating exhausted units, committing reserves, accepting casualties that would cause other commanders to pause and consolidate. He visits forward positions constantly, his presence galvanizing subordinates, his impatience with delay pushing commanders to take risks they might otherwise avoid. When a regimental commander reports his unit is exhausted and requests 24 hours to rest, Patton relieves him on the spot and promotes the executive officer with orders to attack immediately. It's harsh, perhaps brutal, but it maintains momentum. December 26, 1630 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams leads a task force from the 4th Armored Division's 37th Tank Battalion through the final German positions south of Bastogne. His Sherman tanks, engines screaming, guns firing, smash through a roadblock and establish contact with elements of the 101st Airborne. The siege is broken. Bastogne is relieved. The impossible promise is kept. The breakthrough transforms the Battle of the Bulge from potential disaster into German defeat. With Bastogne secured and 3rd Army establishing supply lines from the south, the German offensive loses its critical objective. The roads they need for continued advance remain in American hands. Their own supply lines, stretched thin by the rapid advance, become vulnerable. Weather begins clearing, allowing Allied air power to savage German columns caught in the open. The Bulge, which at its maximum extent on December 26 reached 50 miles deep, begins collapsing. What made Patton's impossible promise possible wasn't superhuman ability or magic. It was preparation meeting opportunity, detailed planning enabling rapid execution, and a command culture that empowered subordinates to make decisions without waiting for orders from above. When Patton told Eisenhower he could attack in 3 days, he wasn't guessing or bluffing. He was stating what his staff had already calculated as possible, if barely, based on contingency plans developed weeks earlier. The staff work deserves equal credit with Patton's boldness. Major General Gay and his operations officers translated strategic vision into tactical orders that more than 130,000 men could actually execute. They built flexibility into rigid military structures, establishing protocols that allowed rapid adaptation when original plans met battlefield reality. The Third Army's pivot north succeeded not because everything went according to plan, but because plans existed, and when they failed, junior officers had sufficient guidance to improvise effectively. The Battle of the Bulge continued until late January 1945, but December 26 marked its turning point. German forces, having failed to capture Bastogne and facing renewed Allied pressure from multiple directions, began withdrawing. They left behind 100,000 casualties, 800 tanks, and the last reserves Germany's military possessed. The offensive that was supposed to split the Allied armies and by Germany negotiating leverage instead accelerated the war's conclusion. By February, Allied forces crossed the Rhine. By May, Germany surrendered. Patton's relief of Bastogne stands as perhaps the finest example of operational maneuver in American military history. The 90-degree pivot of an entire army, executed in weather that grounded aircraft and turned roads to ice rinks, arriving on schedule and combat-ready, accomplished what military professionals considered impossible. The promise that seemed like typical Patton bravado proved to be typical Patton preparation, the swagger backed by substance. Michael Romano improvised mirror sights to save bomber crews. George Patton improvised nothing. He planned, prepared, and executed with a precision that made the impossible merely improbable, and the improbable inevitable. Sometimes the most audacious moves are the most carefully calculated, and the promises that sound most impossible are kept by men who refuse to accept limitations others take as given. The lesson endures. In war as in life, fortune favors not just the bold, but the bold who do their homework.